My parents left me a broken cabin in Alaska. My sister got a $1.2 million mansion in Miami. My fiancé called me a pathetic loser and left me for her. In despair, I went to the cabin. Then I found something worth $500 million. When my parents went missing in Alaska, my younger sister and I were summoned to the lawyer's office to hear their will. That day, my parents' lawyer announced that Jesse would inherit a magnificent beachfront mansion in Miami worth over $1.2 million, along with liquid assets, including cash, stocks, and several bank accounts. And me, I was left with a dilapidated wooden cabin standing alone in the middle of a frigid wilderness forest. That night, Lucas slammed our engagement ring on the table and walked out to chase after Jesse of all people. I felt like the entire world had turned its back on me. But when I opened the creaky door of that rundown cabin, I was stunned. Hidden inside was a secret map leading to mineral deposits worth over $500 million. I kept it a secret, remembering my father's words, a native Alaskan who once taught me, "Money means nothing if it comes at the cost of nature." But then, during a moment of mockery from Jesse and Lucas, I let slip. Just one sentence, and the secret shattered like glass hitting the floor. From that moment, my sister and I were thrust into a bitter battle over the inheritance, unaware that the ones pulling the strings behind it all were our parents. Hello, my name is May Nanook. I was born in Fairbanks, Alaska, where the bone-chilling cold was a constant companion that never left. Our wooden cabin teetered on the edge of the forest where towering pines stood like sentinels, guarding the secrets of the land and sky. The house was small, just a single room that served as both living room and kitchen, a bedroom for my parents, and a cramped attic corner where I curled up in blankets each night, listening to the wind whistle through the wooden cracks. In winter, snow blanketed the roof, and I often woke up with numb fingers despite burrowing deep into a pile of worn-out blankets. My father, Elias Nanook, was a native Alaskan of Inuit descent. He was tall and sturdy, with eyes sharp as a blade and black hair tied neatly at the nape of his neck. He used to be a hired hunter, guiding expedition groups deep into the forest. Later, he worked at a sawmill in a logging company. The work was grueling, but he never complained. To him, labor was a way to prove one's worth to this land. "The land is our mother," he'd say in his deep, steady voice, solid as stone. "You must respect it, for it sustains us, but it can also swallow us whole if we betray it." My mother, Kelly, was the opposite, a gentle woman with golden hair and a smile as warm as the rare sunlight in an Alaskan winter. She was of European-American descent and worked part-time as an office clerk. She loved me. I knew it from the way she stroked my hair every night or slipped a warm piece of bread from the oven into my hand. But she also always supported my father's strictness. "Your father wants what's best for you," she'd say whenever I grumbled about being sent to chop firewood in sub-zero cold. Our family was poor, not the kind of poverty that left us starving or in tattered clothes, but the kind that forced us to weigh every penny carefully before spending it. I remember days following my father into the forest, carrying a tiny axe on my shoulder, chopping dry branches for firewood. Sometimes I waded into the river, the water so cold it felt like my feet were turning to stone, just to catch a few salmon for dinner. Once I even secretly scavenged scrap metal from a dump near town, selling it for a few dollars so my mother could buy extra salt or sugar. Back then, I didn't think of it as hardship. It was just how we lived, how Mother Alaska forced us to live. My father taught me everything about survival. By age 4, I could start a fire with just a flint and a few dry twigs. By 6, I could build a sturdy makeshift shelter in the forest, strong enough to withstand a blizzard. By 8, I could track a moose through the woods, though I was never strong enough to hunt one on my own. My father didn't just teach me skills, he taught me a way of thinking. "Never take more than the land allows," he said when we fished. "Take only what you need to live and leave the rest for tomorrow." My childhood was shaped by those harsh days when the cold of Alaska seeped into every breath. I didn't have fancy toys or know the luxury of extravagant trips. Instead, my childhood was the boundless forest, the icy river, and nights huddled by the fire listening to my father tell stories of our Inuit ancestors, the spirits of the wind, and the mysteries of Mother Earth. Those years forged me into a girl who grew up fast, quiet, and reserved. At school, the other kids called me Forest Girl because of my father's worn-out jacket, my calloused hands used to wielding an axe, and my refusal to join in their noisy games. I didn't care. I knew I was different. While other kids dreamed of cars and color TVs, I dreamed of journeys deep into the forest, where it was just me and the whispers of the land and sky. Harsh as it was, that childhood gave me a quiet pride and an unyielding will, enough to face any challenge that nature or life could throw at me. But I never imagined that the greatest challenge would come, not from the biting cold of Alaska or the long nights deep in the forest. It came from my own family, from my younger sister Jessie, and from the changes that sudden wealth brought to our once humble home. When I was 9, everything in our lives changed overnight, as if Mother Alaska had suddenly smiled upon us. My father, Elias, who was used to grumbling at logs in the sawmill, caught the attention of a large mining company. They needed someone who knew every hill, every stream in this land, and my father, with his razor-sharp eyes and a memory for terrain like a living map, was the perfect choice. The new job brought a salary we could only have dreamed of before, enough to pay off debts, enough for my mother to stop counting every penny when buying groceries. For the first time in our lives, our family escaped the shadow of poverty. We left Fairbanks, leaving behind the old wooden cabin where I used to huddle in the attic, and moved to a new house in Anchorage, Alaska's largest city. Our new home had a proper fireplace, clear glass windows, and no gaps for the wind to sneak through. After moving to Anchorage, my mother quit her part-time office job to open a small diner. The diner, located at a bustling street corner, had a wooden sign carved with Kelly's Kitchen, and the mouth-watering aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the neighborhood. Customers flocked in, from locals to long-haul truck drivers. My mother smiled more, her eyes lighting up every time she saw the cash register brimming. That same year, Jessie was born. My younger sister, a girl with golden hair like our mother's and big sparkling eyes like a summer lake. Jessie came into the world at a time when our family no longer worried about food or clothing. She grew up in a warm house with a room full of toys I never dared dream of at her age. I remember pushing Jessie's stroller around the neighborhood, watching her giggle as our mother handed her a brand new stuffed bear. I wasn't jealous. Truly, Jessie was my little sister and I loved her. I liked being the big sister, teaching her how to tie her shoes or showing her how to read the clouds to predict rain. But as Jessie grew, I began to notice differences, not just between us as sisters, but between the worlds we were raised in. But as Jessie grew, I began to notice differences, not just between us as sisters, but between the worlds we were raised in. I grew up in bone-chilling cold, in days of chopping firewood until my hands went numb. In the harsh lessons my father taught me about survival, I absorbed his teachings about preserving nature, the way he looked at me as if he were entrusting me with the legacy of our Inuit ancestors. And Jessie, she never knew the cold of a night without firewood, never waded into a river to catch fish, never heard our father's stories about Mother Earth. Our parents, busy with their new jobs, didn't have time to teach Jessie the lessons they had ingrained in me. Instead, they compensated with material things. Jessie had new shoes every season, a shiny bicycle, even a small TV in her room for cartoons. Whenever Jessie wanted something, our mother would smile and nod, and our father, though still stern, couldn't bring himself to say no. "She's still young. Let her enjoy herself," my mother would say when I asked why Jessie didn't have to do chores like I did at her age. Jessie didn't just grow up in abundance. She grew up believing everything in life came easily. At school, she was the center of attention with her expensive clothes and confident way of talking, as if the world revolved around her. The kids didn't call Jessie Forest Girl. They called her the Princess of Anchorage, and Jessie loved it. She loved the praise, loved showing off her new watch or shiny shoes. Sometimes when I looked at her, she felt like a stranger. I didn't blame our parents. They only wanted to give Jessie what I never had. But I slowly realized that their indulgence had planted a dangerous seed in my sister's heart. Jessie didn't value what she had. She took everything for granted: money, clothes, even our parents' love. Once I saw her toss aside a brand new jacket because it had a small scratch. "Mom will buy me another," she said, shrugging as if it were only natural. I looked at her, wanting to say something, but stayed silent. I remembered how our father taught me to mend clothes with a needle and thread, how he told me a woman must cherish what she has, no matter how small. The differences between us became more pronounced as I entered my teenage years. I still woke up early to help our father fix fences or shovel snow from the driveway. Jessie slept until noon, then ran off with her friends, laughing loudly. I still loved trips into the forest, where I could hear the whisper of the wind and feel Mother Earth beneath my feet. Jessie loved the city lights, the noisy bars, the parties where she could show off. I lived by our father's ways, disciplined patience and respect for nature. Jessie lived as if the world existed only to serve her. Once I tried talking to her. "Jessie," I began, as we sat in the kitchen while our mother baked in the oven, "have you ever thought about learning to fish or set up a camp like Dad taught me?" Jessie looked at me and smirked. "Why bother with that stuff, sis? Mom and Dad have money now. We don't need to live like forest people anymore." I didn't respond. Her words cut like a knife, not because they hurt me, but because I realized Jessie didn't understand and perhaps never would. In those years, I began to feel an invisible distance growing between me and my sister. I still loved her, still saw her as my little sister, but I couldn't ignore that we were walking different paths. I was a woman of the forest, of Mother Earth, of the harsh but honest lessons. Jessie was a woman of the city lights, of glamour, of things that came too easily. I thought that despite our differences, we were still family, that we could still hold hands through those years. But then Lucas entered my life, and with him I learned that love could be a flame that warms the heart, but also a storm that burns away every shred of trust. I met Lucas one summer afternoon in Anchorage, when the rare sunlight melted the ice on the streets. I was in my mother's diner, helping her clean tables after the lunch rush. The smell of freshly baked bread and coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the chatter and laughter of a few regular customers. I looked up and saw him, Lucas, with gently curled brown hair, eyes as blue as a glacial lake, and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. He wore a thin sweater, held a book in his hand, and walked into the diner as if he'd always belonged there. "A black coffee and a slice of toast, please," he said, his voice soft but confident, as if he knew exactly what he wanted. I wasn't the type to be easily smitten. Life in Fairbanks had taught me to keep my heart guarded, like I kept a fire alive on freezing nights. But there was something about Lucas that I couldn't look away from. Maybe it was the way he sat reading his book, quiet but fully absorbed, as if the world had shrunk to the pages in front of him. Maybe it was the way he smiled at my mother, calling her Aunt Kelly with natural warmth. Or maybe it was simply that he felt different from the people I'd met who only cared about parties or new clothes. I mustered all my courage to strike up a conversation. "Good book?" I asked, wiping a table but keeping my eyes on him. Lucas looked up, slightly surprised, then smiled. "Pretty good," he replied, holding up the book, a collection of poems by Robert Frost. "Do you like poetry?" I shook my head a bit, embarrassed. "I'm not much for poetry, but I love the forest and the things he writes about. The wind, the smell of earth, the shadows of trees. Those are things I see every day." He looked at me, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "A forest girl, huh?" he teased, his tone playful but kind. I laughed, feeling lighter for the first time that day. "You could say that." From then on, we started talking. Lucas was the son of a middle-class family in Anchorage, not overly wealthy, but comfortable enough for him to grow up with things I never had: summer vacations in California, piano lessons, beautiful clothes. But he didn't brag. He spoke of his dream to become a journalist, to travel the world, and write about forgotten people and places. "I want to tell the stories of people like you," he said once as we sat by the river, watching the water shimmer under the sunset. People who live true to themselves, not chasing false glamour. I was drawn to Lucas not just because he was handsome, but because he seemed to understand me. He didn't laugh when I talked about chopping firewood in Fairbanks, about how my father taught me to start a fire or track a deer. He listened, his eyes lighting up as if he were living in my stories. When I spoke of Mother Earth, of the lessons my father passed down, he took my hand gently but firmly. "You're different, May," he said. "You're not like those people who only brag about cars or money. You have strength." His words made my heart race, as if for the first time someone saw the real me. We fell in love. Those days felt like my life had been lit up. I took Lucas into the forest, showed him how to pitch a tent, how to spot animal tracks. He laughed loudly when he tried to start a fire for the first time and sent smoke billowing everywhere. I taught him to listen to the wind, to feel the pulse of Mother Earth. In return, he taught me to open up, to talk about things I'd always kept hidden. I told him about my harsh childhood, about nights by the fire listening to my father's stories, about the quiet pride of surviving Alaska's cold. He hugged me, whispering, "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." But as our love deepened, I began to notice changes in Lucas. He grew more ambitious, craving more than what Anchorage could offer. He dreamed of big cities, prestigious newsrooms, luxurious apartments in New York or Los Angeles. At first, I thought his ambition was a strength, a fire like my own resilience. But slowly, I saw him start to compare. And painfully, the person he compared me to was Jessie. Jessie, now in her 20s, was the epitome of what Anchorage called success. She drove a sleek sports car, wore tailored outfits with glittering watches on her wrist, and lived in a beachfront apartment our parents had bought her, a place with a balcony overlooking the ocean where she threw extravagant parties. Her friends were the elite young business people with confident smiles, beautiful companions, in elegant outfits, and conversations filled with laughter and clinking glasses. For Jessie, life was a stage, and she always wanted to be the star. Lucas began to see me differently. He used to call me different, but gradually his gaze would drift away when I spoke of the forest, of Mother Earth, or the values my father had instilled in me. He started looking at Jessie, my spoiled younger sister, with an admiration he'd never shown me. He was drawn to her glamour. One ordinary afternoon, as we walked along Anchorage's coastal road, I saw Jessie standing by her car, laughing loudly with a group of friends. Lucas stopped, looked at her, then turned to me. "You see your sister?" he said, his voice tinged with an admiration I didn't want to hear. "She knows how to live. She knows how to make people notice." His words were like a small, sharp knife, not enough to draw blood immediately, but enough to sting. I tried to keep my voice steady, as I did when facing the cold forest winds. "Jessie has always been like that," I replied. "She has her way of living. I have mine." But Lucas didn't stop there. In the days that followed, he said things that pierced my heart. "Why do you live so small, May?" he asked once as we sat in my mother's diner, his eyes looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You don't know how to enjoy life. You don't show off. Don't you see Jessie? She lives big, lives truly." I stayed silent, my hand tightening around my coffee mug, but I didn't speak. I just looked at him, seeing his eyes grow distant, as if I were no longer the woman he loved. Lucas began to criticize me, not with blunt words, but with subtle remarks and disappointed sighs. "You lack ambition," he said once, as we sat by the river. "You could do so much more. Why don't you want to be like Jessie, with money, status, everything that makes people respect you?" I wanted to shout that I didn't need anyone's respect, that I didn't want to be Jessie, that my worth wasn't in cars or beachfront apartments, but I only stared at the water, feeling a block of ice slowly pressing down on my heart. To Lucas, living big meant having wealth to flaunt, spending lavishly, and commanding attention in society. He wanted the spotlight, to stand beside a woman who made the world turn and look. And I, with my old jacket, my rough hands from wielding an axe, my dreams of the forest and Mother Earth, couldn't give him that. I began to feel the cracks forming, and those cracks grew wider each day. Deep down, I knew they couldn't be mended. Lucas wasn't just comparing me to Jessie. He was being drawn into her world, a world of lights and glamour. He no longer saw me as a woman of strength, but as someone lacking ambition, someone living small while my sister lived large. I tried to hold on to him, tried to remind myself that our love was worth fighting for, but I never expected that before I could even try to salvage what we had, a greater storm would crash into my life, sweeping away everything I once thought was certain. My parents went missing, leaving behind a void colder than any winter I'd ever endured in Fairbanks. I was 30 years old when the devastating news arrived. It was an early winter morning, with snow lightly falling on the streets of Anchorage, blanketing rooftops and sidewalks in a thin layer. I was at my mother's diner, helping her clean up after a busy morning rush. The phone rang, and a stranger's voice came through, dry and emotionless. "Are you May Nanook? I'm an officer with the Seattle Police. I'm very sorry to inform you that your parents, Elias and Kelly Nanook, have gone missing after a plane crash." The world seemed to stop. I stood there, still holding the rag I'd been using to wipe tables, but all the sounds around me, the chatter of customers, the clanging of pots and pans in the kitchen, faded into a blur. The officer continued, his voice steady, like he was reading a report. The small plane carrying your parents encountered trouble while flying over the icy mountains near the Canadian border. Some wreckage has been found scattered across the mountainside, but there's no sign of bodies or survivors. We're continuing the search, he added, but his tone carried no hope. We'll contact you if we have more information. I hung up, feeling as if an icy weight was crushing my chest. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I didn't know what to do with the pain. It was too vast, too cold, too real. I called Jessie right after. She was at a bar. I could hear loud music and laughter in the background. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice distracted as if I were telling some unimportant story. When I repeated the news, she went quiet for a moment, then said, "Yeah, okay, you handle it. I'm busy." She hung up, leaving me with the cold beep of the disconnected line. The days that followed were a foggy nightmare. Local media began covering the crash. Alaska couple missing in plane crash screamed the sensational headlines in Anchorage newspapers. People in the community, those who'd eaten my mother's bread or been guided through the forest by my father, came to the diner to express their condolences. They hugged me, offered words of comfort, but I felt only emptiness. Lucas stayed by my side, at least at first. He held my hand, whispering that he'd always be there, that we'd get through this together. But his eyes were distant, no longer warm like they used to be. While I drowned in grief, Jessie acted strangely. She showed up at the diner a few days later, dressed impeccably as always in a new leather jacket and polished boots. "How's it going, sis?" she asked, her voice light but insincere. I looked at her and saw a stranger, someone seemingly untouched by the pain I was carrying. "Aren't you sad?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Jessie shrugged, flashing an enigmatic smile. "Sure, I'm sad, but life goes on, you know. Mom and Dad would want that." I didn't respond. I couldn't fathom how she could be so calm, but then I overheard her talking to a friend on the phone right there in the diner, her voice brimming with excitement. "Yeah, the will's probably going to be read soon. Hopefully there's something worthwhile, right?" I stood there, my hand gripping the edge of the table, feeling a cold wind blow through my heart. Jessie wasn't just calm. She was thinking about the inheritance, about what our parents might have left behind, while I still couldn't accept that they were gone. A few weeks later, the court declared my parents deceased, based on the plane wreckage and the absence of any signs of survivors. Death certificates were issued, cold and official, like a final punctuation mark on all hope. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But the papers in front of me, with their red seals and judge's signature, left no room for denial. The Anchorage community began to express their grief. They brought to our house loaves of bread, salmon soup, and carefully woven wreaths of golden wildflowers. The next day, a small memorial was held by the river where my father used to fish. People lit candles in the cold Alaskan wind, sharing memories, how my father had helped them repair boats, how my mother baked bread to share with the neighborhood every winter. I stood listening silently, realizing that my parents didn't just belong to me. They were part of this community. But when the last candle flickered out and everyone left, I was alone again, with a void nothing could fill. Lucas stayed with me during those days, but his presence only deepened my pain. He tried to comfort me, but his words sounded rehearsed. "May, you have to be strong," he said. But his eyes looked elsewhere, as if his mind was on something else. And I kept going to the diner, wiping tables, answering customers' questions about my parents, but my mind was elsewhere. Lost in the forests, I used to roam with my father. I dreamed of my parents every night, my father standing by the river, teaching me to fish, my mother in the kitchen, smiling at me through the steam of baking bread. But every morning, I woke to the cold truth. They were gone, and I didn't know how to keep living. Then, on a gloomy afternoon, when the Anchorage sky was heavy with clouds, as if it too carried my sorrow, the phone rang. A polite but cold voice came through. "May Nanook, this is Gunnar Holmes, your family's lawyer. I need you and your sister Jessie to come to my office tomorrow morning for the reading of your parents' will." I stood there gripping the phone, feeling a chill sweep through me. I called Jessie. "The will?" she said, her voice brimming with excitement that made me shudder. "Great, sis. Finally, something worth looking forward to. See you tomorrow." She hung up, leaving me with a gnawing sense of unease. The next morning, I arrived at Gunnar Holmes's office, a small but elegant building in downtown Anchorage with glass walls and a polished brass sign. Jessie showed up late, striding in, wearing a sleek black suit, her hair perfectly styled, and a confident smile as if she already knew what was coming. "Hey, sis," she said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were close friends, not sisters facing a moment that could change our lives. The lawyer's meeting room was small but stifling, with a long wooden table and leather-upholstered chairs. Gunnar Holmes, a middle-aged man with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, sat at the head of the table, a thick stack of documents in front of him. He looked at us, his expression stern but neutral. "May, Jessie," he began, his voice steady like a proclamation. "Today we will read the will of Elias Nanook and Kelly Nanook. I offer my condolences for your loss, but as per your parents' wishes, I will now read what they have left behind." I sat there, my heart pounding, not because I expected anything, but because I felt like I was reopening a wound that hadn't healed. Jessie, on the other hand, sat upright, her eyes gleaming, as if the lawyer were about to hand her a golden key. Gunnar opened the file, flipped a few pages, and began reading. His first words hit the room like a cold gust of wind. "To our youngest daughter, Jessie Nanook, we leave the beachfront mansion in Miami, valued at over $1.2 million, along with liquid assets, including cash, stocks, and several bank accounts." The room seemed to hold its breath. Jessie let out a small, triumphant laugh, unable to hide her satisfaction. Gunnar continued, his voice still calm. "To our eldest daughter, May Nanook, we leave the wooden cabin in the remote forest near Fairbanks, Alaska, where our family lived in our youth." He paused, looking at me as if expecting a reaction. I said nothing. I couldn't say anything. The cabin, the place where I'd huddled in the attic, where my father taught me to start a fire, where my mother sang me lullabies on freezing nights. It was now just a dilapidated legacy, something no one wanted, something no one cared about. I felt as if my parents had disowned me, as if all my efforts, my discipline, the lessons I'd learned from them were meaningless. Jessie looked at me, her smile now wider, dripping with smugness. "Well, sis," she said, her tone mocking, "that cabin's perfect for you. Forest girl, right?" I didn't respond, only feeling betrayed, not just by Jessie, but by our parents, the people I thought understood me better than anyone. That evening, I returned to my small apartment carrying a heavy pain. Lucas was waiting for me, sitting on the sofa, but his eyes no longer held the warmth they once did. "So how'd it go?" he asked, his voice cold, as if he'd already guessed the outcome. I recounted everything, each word like a knife I drove into my own heart. When I mentioned the cabin, he laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but a bitter, almost scornful one. "A rotting wooden cabin," he said, standing up, hands on his hips. "That's all you got, May? Are you serious? Jessie gets $1 million mansion, and you get a pile of broken wood?" I tried to explain, tried to say I didn't care about money, but Lucas wouldn't listen. He paced the room, his voice rising. "Don't you see? Jessie knows how to live, how to win, and you cling to that small life, holding on to your forest, your Mother Earth nonsense. But where has it gotten you? A crumbling cabin." He stopped, staring straight at me, his eyes flashing with disappointment. "You're a loser, May. You'll never measure up to your sister." His words were like a blizzard sweeping away the last of my hope. I stood there silent, watching as Lucas slammed the engagement ring on the table, the ring I had saved up for a year to buy. "I can't live like this," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I need a woman who lives big, who does something with her life, not someone who just holds an axe and dreams of the forest." He turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving me with the sound of the door slamming shut. Just a few days after our fight, Lucas went public with his new relationship with Jessie. My younger sister, with her $1 million mansion and triumphant smile, had become the woman he chose. I sat in my empty apartment, clutching the ring he'd left behind, feeling as if everything I'd believed in, love, family, loyalty, had melted away like snow under the sun. I'd lost my parents, I'd lost Lucas, and now I felt like I'd lost myself. In the days after Lucas left, I lived like someone trapped in a blizzard, unable to see the path ahead, hearing nothing but the howling wind in my mind. I avoided Jessie, avoided my mother's diner, which had once been my only solace. Every street corner in Anchorage now felt like a reminder of betrayal. Lucas's smile as he stood beside Jessie, her triumphant look when she learned she'd inherited the $1 million mansion. I couldn't stay in this city any longer, couldn't face the pitying glances of neighbors or the whispers behind my back. I needed a place to breathe, a place to rediscover myself. I decided to head to the log cabin in Fairbanks, the legacy my parents left me, though in everyone else's eyes it was just a pile of rotting wood. The journey to Fairbanks was long and cold, like a trip back to my childhood. I drove my father's old beat-up truck through snow-covered roads flanked by endless stretches of pine forests. Every tree, every hill stirred memories. "The land is our mother," my father used to say, his voice steady as stone. "You have to listen, to respect it, and the land will answer." I wondered if Mother Earth was answering me now or merely punishing me. The cabin came into view as I turned onto a rough dirt road. It was smaller than I remembered, its roof sagging, the wooden walls grayed by years of rain and snow. The windows were caked with dust. Some planks had rotted, and the chimney looked like it could collapse at any moment. I pushed the door open and the hinges screeched like a lament. Inside, the air was cold and damp, smelling of rotting wood mixed with earth. Faint light filtered through the windows, illuminating the cracked wooden floor. I saw the attic corner where I used to sleep, the fireplace my mother once tended, the small table where my father had carved my name into a piece of wood. Everything was as it had been, but now it felt empty, like a house without a soul. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, letting the pain wash over me. I thought about the will, about how my parents chose Jessie over me, about how Lucas chose her over me. I started cleaning the cabin. I swept away dust, cleared broken bits of wood, and wiped down the fireplace. While trying to fix a loose floorboard, I noticed it made a strange hollow sound, as if there was a void beneath it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I used my father's knife to pry the board up. A small wooden compartment appeared, hidden deep under the floor, like a secret kept for years. Inside was an old metal box, rusted at the edges, but still sturdy. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a carefully folded map, its paper yellowed, but still legible. The lines were drawn in black ink, accompanied by symbols in an Alaska Native language, characters my father had taught me when I was young. I spread the map out on the floor, the faint light from the window illuminating the winding lines that led deep into the forest. Some areas were marked with a small triangle symbolizing a mineral deposit. Others had a black droplet indicating oil, and layered lines represented valuable timber forests. In the corner of the map, in my father's handwriting, was a note. "True value lies not in what you take, but in what you keep." I read it over and over, and for a moment it was as if I could hear his voice in my ear. I leaned closer, tracing each line, my heart pounding as I began to grasp the meaning. The marked lands, if the notes were accurate, held resources worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a treasure beyond anything I'd ever dared to dream of. I sat silently in the rotting cabin, clutching the map, feeling as though my entire life hung in the balance. Part of me screamed to run outside, to shout to the world that I wasn't a failure, not the wilderness fool Lucas had mocked, that I held a fortune that could make me richer than Jessie, richer than anyone. But another part, the part my father had patiently shaped, whispered a reminder: not everything that can be taken should be taken. The land is our mother, and she must be preserved, not stripped bare. My heart began to tear itself apart. I didn't yet know what to do with the map, so I decided to bring it back to my apartment in Anchorage, hiding it in a locked drawer. Every night, I took the map out and stared at it as if it could tell me what I should do. I imagined selling the information about those lands, getting revenge on Jessie by proving I was wealthier than her. I pictured Lucas coming back, his eyes sparkling when he saw I was no longer the small-time woman he had left behind. But then I remembered my father, who taught me that Mother Earth is sacred, that taking too much is a betrayal. I remembered my mother, who once said, "Happiness lies not in money, but in how we live." I decided to keep the secret, to neither exploit nor sell it. I wanted to honor my parents' legacy, even if it meant I remained just May Nanook, the woman of the woods, nothing more. A month after my parents' disappearance, I decided to hold a small gathering to honor them, the people who raised me and Jessie, who left me with lessons that could never fade. I wanted a quiet space where family and friends could share memories of my parents, where I could feel them again, even if only through stories and smiles. I chose my mother's diner as the venue because it was where she poured her heart, where the smell of fresh-baked bread and coffee still lingered like a piece of her soul. I stood in the diner, arranging chairs in a circle, placing a photo of my parents on the table, my father with his stern smile, my mother with her gentle eyes. Familiar faces arrived gradually, bringing flowers and condolences. Aunt Mary, my mother's cousin, hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Old Joe, who used to hunt with my father, patted my shoulder with quiet sympathy. I stayed silent, forcing a smile, but inside I felt only emptiness. Jessie arrived late as usual. She walked in, Lucas at her side. Seeing them together, my heart felt like it was being crushed. She held his hand, smiling lightly as he whispered something in her ear. I turned away, focusing on arranging coffee cups for the guests, but that image clung to me like salt rubbed into a wound. The memorial began. People took turns sharing memories of my parents. Aunt Mary spoke of the time my mother taught her to bake bread, her voice choking with emotion. Joe recounted hunting trips with my father, laughing loudly as he recalled how my father teased him for being terrible at fishing. I spoke too, though my voice trembled. I talked about nights by the fire, listening to my father speak of Mother Earth, how he taught me that true value lies not in money, but in integrity. But when it was Jessie's turn, she stood briefly, saying only a few words. Mom and Dad were amazing people. They worked hard to give us a better life. I'll always be grateful. She sat down, and Lucas clapped, his eyes full of pride. I looked at her, searching for a hint of sincerity in her voice, but found only shallowness. She spoke as if reading a prepared speech, not from the heart. I wanted to stand up, to scream in her face that our parents deserved to be remembered with love, not empty platitudes, but I held back, clenching my fists under the table, trying to stay calm. After the sharing, people began to chat and eat, and the atmosphere grew lighter. I stood in a corner of the room, watching everyone, trying to blend in, but feeling out of place. Then Jessie and Lucas approached, each holding a glass of wine. "Well, big sister," Jessie said, her tone mocking, "this memorial's not half bad, but Mom and Dad would probably be prouder if you did something bigger than this little diner." Lucas chuckled, his arm sliding around her waist. "Yeah," he added, his voice sweet but sharp as a knife. Their words ignited a fire inside me. I'd had enough. Enough of Jessie's taunts, Lucas's scornful looks, the constant feeling of being belittled. I shot to my feet, my voice trembling with rage. "You think I'm nothing, don't you? You think I'm just a failure with a rotting cabin? Well, I have something neither of you will ever have." I paused, my heart pounding, knowing I was going too far, but unable to stop. I found a map in the cabin, a map pointing to mineral deposits, oil, precious timber worth over $500 million. You hear me? 500 million. The crowded room went deathly quiet, the air so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Dozens of eyes turned to me, but they all blurred. Only Jessie and Lucas stood out. Jessie's face paled for a moment, then twisted into a greedy smile. Her eyes gleamed with suspicion and excitement, as if she'd already touched the gold. "May," she said, her voice shaky but eager, "are you serious, or did you just lose it and blurt that out?" Lucas was different. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a mocking smirk on his lips. "Oh, come on, May. Another one of your attention-grabbing stunts? A treasure? Sounds like something out of a children's book." I didn't respond. My throat tightened, but my feet moved. I turned and left the diner in silence, ignoring the murmurs rising behind me. I had just revealed the biggest secret of my life, and I knew from this moment there was no going back. Jessie, with her insatiable greed, would surely pursue it to the end. Lucas, with his cold pretense, would find a way to exploit it to the fullest. The door swung open. I stepped outside. The biting winds stung my skin, and snow fell heavily on the road, as weighty as the gaze of Mother Earth. Everything seemed to be watching, waiting to see which path I would choose next. Just a few days after the memorial, the real storm began. Jessie didn't waste any time. The morning after, as I sat in my small apartment trying to sort through my chaotic thoughts, a letter was slipped under the door. I opened it, and the cold words of a law firm hit me like a slap. Jessie had filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of concealing family inheritance assets. The legal claim stated that the treasure map, the one I found in the cabin, was part of the Nanook family legacy, and that I, May, was intentionally trying to keep it for myself. I read it over and over, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from a rage that flared like wildfire. My sister, the one who once held my hand as a child, who giggled when I taught her to tie her shoes, was now dragging me to court as if we had never been family. But Jessie didn't stop at lawsuits. She was busy spreading rumors like a toxic wind sweeping through Anchorage. I heard from Aunt Mary that Jessie had been going around from high society parties to family gatherings, telling anyone who would listen that I was a selfish woman hiding a $500 million treasure. The legacy of the entire Nanook clan. May thinks she can keep it all to herself, she'd say, her voice dripping with feigned indignation, as if she were the one betrayed. She's not thinking of the family, not thinking of Mom and Dad. Her words spread like fire through a dry forest, and soon it seemed the entire city had heard about May's treasure. Distant relatives began to circle like vultures smelling blood. Uncle Carl, a man I'd only met a handful of times in my life, called me one evening, his voice as sweet as honey. "May, how you holding up? Heard you found something pretty interesting in your parents' cabin, huh?" he asked, as if we were old pals. "Family's got to stick together, May. If there's something valuable, you should share it with everyone, right? Don't let people think you're selfish." I gripped the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Uncle, I'm not keeping anything. It's just a map, and I haven't done anything with it." But Carl wouldn't let up. He laughed loudly, as if I'd just told a joke. "Don't play coy with me, May. If you don't share, people won't be happy. You don't want the whole clan turning their backs on you, do you?" His threat cut like a knife. But it wasn't the only one. Others, distant relatives, old friends, even people I'd never met, started reaching out. An old friend texted me, suggesting I share the map's information for resource extraction, promising to split the profits. A former neighbor stopped by the diner, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "May, do the right thing. Don't let people think you're greedy." I looked at them, faces that were once familiar, now twisted by greed. I wanted to scream that I wasn't planning to take anything, that I just wanted to honor my parents' wishes to protect Mother Earth, but I knew they wouldn't understand. To them, I was no longer May, the woman raised in the woods who respected the land and sky. I was just the one holding a treasure they wanted a piece of. The tabloid media jumped in like sharks smelling blood. One morning, as I opened the local paper, a sensational headline screamed, "Alaska woman hoards $500 million family treasure." The article was riddled with fabrications, calling me a selfish daughter and a disloyal heir, trying to steal the legacy from my sister and family. Reporters began loitering outside the diner, cameras flashing every time I stepped out. "May, what can you tell us about the treasure map?" one shouted, thrusting a microphone in my face. "What are you going to do with $500 million?" I didn't answer, just kept my head down and pushed past them. But it felt like I was being hunted. Every step I took, I could feel the city's eyes on me as if I were a criminal. Worse still, the cabin in Fairbanks, the place where I grew up, where memories of my parents lived, became the center of morbid curiosity. A friend from Fairbanks called to warn me that locals had started showing up, lurking around the property, some even sneaking in to search for the treasure. I drove there the next day, and the sight before me broke my heart. The wooden fence was torn down, windows smashed, the yard littered with haphazardly dug holes. The cabin, though already dilapidated, had been sacred to me. Now it was violated, as if Mother Earth herself had been insulted. I stood in the yard, snow falling silently, and it felt like the land was weeping with me. And Lucas, of course, didn't stay out of it. One evening, he appeared at my apartment door wearing an expensive fur coat, his eyes soft like they used to be. "May," he said, his voice so sweet it sent chills down my spine. "I'm sorry for what happened. I was wrong. You're not a failure. You have that map. We could do something big together." I looked at him, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. He hadn't come back because he loved me, or because he understood me. He came back for the $500 million, for the glamour he thought I could now provide. "Get out," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I don't need you, and I don't need your lies." Lucas froze, his lips tightening, but then he turned and walked away, leaving me with a heavy loneliness. I was cornered like a beast surrounded by wolves. Alone, I had to face Jessie's greed, Lucas's deceit, and the relentless scrutiny and harassment from relatives, acquaintances, and the media. Each day, the pressure grew heavier, like an unending blizzard. I began to wonder if I was wrong, if I should just give up the map, share it with everyone, and live the big life they wanted. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I heard my father's voice. The land is our mother, and you must protect her. I clutched the map hidden in the drawer and told myself I wouldn't betray my parents' legacy, no matter the cost. The tension escalated to a breaking point, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, with no way out. But I didn't know that just when everything seemed lost, a greater truth was waiting, ready to reveal the final answer. 2 months later, the inheritance dispute between Jesse and me officially began. That day, the Anchorage sky was cloaked in heavy gray, as if nature itself was growling at the storm about to erupt. I stepped into the courtroom, my heart aching, feeling like a trapped animal surrounded by the cold stares of lawyers, the sternness of the judge, and the curious gazes of strangers there to watch the drama unfold. Jessie sat across from me, her eyes sharp and cold, the corner of her mouth curling into a confident smirk, as if victory was already in her grasp. Beside her, Lucas was dressed in a dazzling suit, but his eyes avoided mine, the woman he once promised forever. I clenched my rough hands inside my father's old jacket, my breath heavy as I tried to stay calm. Deep down, I wanted to scream that I didn't care about money, that all I wanted was to protect my parents' legacy. But I knew in this room no one truly cared. The judge, a middle-aged man with a deep, stern voice, banged his gavel to start the proceedings. Jesse's lawyer stood, his voice sharp and accusing, alleging that I had hidden the map, a shared asset of the Nanook family, and demanded that the court force me to surrender it for equal division. May Nanook has deliberately tried to monopolize an inheritance worth $500 million, he declared. She has not only betrayed her sister, but also the family and the values her parents left behind. His words were like daggers slicing deep into my pride. I wanted to stand up, to say that I never intended to keep anything for myself, that I only wanted to preserve Mother Earth, but my lawyer, a court-appointed one, told me to stay quiet, that he would handle the rest. I looked at Jessie and saw her smiling, that same triumphant grin from the day Gunnar read the will. Lucas held her hand, his eyes sparkling with pride, but I knew it wasn't for Jessie. It was for the $1 million mansion and the glamour she thought he brought. I bowed my head, trying to focus on my father's words. True value lies not in what you take, but in what you keep. But in this room, surrounded by greedy stares and accusations, I felt like I was losing, as if everything I believed in was meaningless. Then, just as the judge was about to ask me his first question, the courtroom door swung open. A cold gust of wind rushed in, accompanied by murmurs from those present. I looked up, and my heart stopped. Standing in the doorway with a familiarity that hurt were my parents, Elias Nanook and Kelly Nanook. My father, tall and sturdy with his black hair tied back and eyes sharp as a blade. My mother, gentle with her golden hair and warm smile, though her eyes now carried a hint of sternness. The courtroom was stunned, gasps turning to shocked whispers before falling silent. As my father stepped forward, his deep voice resonated through the room. We're not dead, and we have something to say. I sat there, unable to believe my eyes. Jessie jumped up, her face pale, mouth agape as if she'd seen a ghost. Lucas gripped her hand tightly, his eyes filled with panic as if he knew everything was about to collapse. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but even he couldn't hide his astonishment. Mr. and Mrs. Nanook, he said, his voice slightly trembling. Please explain. My father stepped up to the stand, my mother beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. Everything you've seen, the plane crash, the will, the map, was a test. My father began, his voice steady like when he taught me about Mother Earth. We wanted to see which of our 2 daughters was worthy of inheriting our ancestors' legacy. Not money, not land, but the values we've spent our lives protecting. He looked at me, then at Jessie, his gaze sharp but not judgmental. We faked our disappearance to see what you would do when faced with temptation. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. My head spun as if the ground beneath me was shaking. Jessie shook her head, stammering, Dad, Mom, what kind of joke is this? I inherited the mansion. The assets? The lawyer said so. Gunnar, who had been sitting in the corner, stood up, his voice calm but clear. That will was fake, Jessie, he said. At your parents' request, I presented a fabricated will to test you and your sister. The beachfront mansion in Miami, the liquid assets, they all still belong to Mr. and Mrs. Nanook. Jessie was stunned, as if she'd been slapped. Lucas let go of her hand, his eyes frantic, darting from Jessie to me, then to my parents. I sat there, my heart pounding, not from joy, but from realization. My father continued, his voice low but powerful. The map May found was also fake, another test. The symbols and information on it were entirely fabricated. If May had let greed cloud her judgment, if she had tried to sell those secrets, she would have gained nothing and lost everything. But May chose to stay silent, to keep the secret and honor Mother Earth, just as I taught her. Then his eyes turned to Jessie, sad but not angry. But you, Jessie, you let greed guide you. You sued your sister, spread rumors, and treated money as everything. You are not worthy of the Nanook name. Jessie bowed her head, unable to speak. Lucas, pale as a ghost, stood up and stepped toward me. May, he whispered, his voice trembling. I was wrong. I shouldn't have left you. We can start over, right? I looked at him, his eyes now pleading, but all I saw was deceit. No, Lucas, I said, my voice cold as ice. You chose Jessie for money, and now you're coming back for money. I don't need you. Lucas stood there, humiliated, then stormed out of the courtroom, leaving whispers in his wake. Meanwhile, the judge, still in shock, declared the lawsuit dismissed. My parents approached me, and my mother hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. You did the right thing, May, she whispered. You're the daughter we've always been proud of. Jessie, now empty-handed, fell to her knees before our parents in the courtroom. I'm sorry, she said, her voice choked with sobs. I was wrong. Please give me a chance. My father looked at her, his gaze stern but not unforgiving. You'll have a chance, Jessie, he said, but you must prove yourself worthy. Live a year in the forest as I did, and learn to respect Mother Earth. If you can do that, you'll have what you deserve. Jessie nodded, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment, I saw in her a glimpse of the little girl who once held my hand years ago. That evening, in the wooden cabin in Fairbanks, where memories of my childhood still lingered in every weathered plank, I sat with my parents for the first time since those agonizing months when I thought I'd lost them forever. The firelight from the old hearth danced, casting flickering shadows on the walls. My father, with the rugged presence of an Inuit man, sat in an old wooden chair. His hands clasped tightly, his sharp eyes softened with affection as he looked at me. My mother, her golden hair now streaked with silver, sat beside me. Her gentle hand rested on mine, warm as it was when she used to stroke my hair as a child. They told me their story, a story of survival, of love, and of unwavering faith in me. After the plane crash, my father began, his voice deep, like the wind rustling through the pines. We were stranded in the icy mountains with no phone, no signal, no hope. But I learned from your grandfather, from the Inuit before him, that Mother Earth never abandons her children if they know how to listen. He spoke of the long days and the biting cold, how he built fires from the smallest dry twigs, hunted snow hares to feed my mother, and constructed a shelter from snow and stone to withstand the storms. With every step I thought of you and Jessie, he said, his eyes softening. I told myself that if we survived, I had to do something to make you understand. Understand that true value lies not in what you have, but in who you are. My mother squeezed my hand tighter, her eyes glistening with tears, but her smile still warm as the rare Alaskan summer sun. May, you are our pride, she said, her voice choked with emotion, but filled with love. When you were young, I watched you chop firewood, wade into rivers to catch fish, and I knew you were stronger than anyone, not because you were taller or richer, but because you had the heart of Mother Earth, honest, resilient, and never betraying what your father taught you. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. When we decided to fake our deaths, I was terrified. Terrified that you'd be hurt, that you'd think we abandoned you. But I believed in you. Believed that you wouldn't let greed guide you, that you'd hold on to our family's legacy. I sat there in the familiar wooden cabin, feeling as if I were back in those nights by the fire when my father told stories of our Inuit ancestors, when my mother sang me lullabies through blizzards. Their words were like a flame warming my heart, thawing the chill of those lonely months. We wanted to see who you were when we were gone, my mother continued, her eyes locking onto mine as if to etch every word into my soul. And you, May, gave us the answer. You didn't choose money, didn't choose glory. You chose Mother Earth, chose what we taught you. You are the daughter we've always been proud of. My father stood and walked to the hearth where the firelight illuminated his face, highlighting its weathered but compassionate lines. He pulled a small wooden box from his coat pocket, intricately carved with Inuit patterns, a gift I recognized from my grandfather to him. "This is the real map," he said, handing it to me. "You have full authority over this map, to exploit it or preserve it. The choice is yours, but I trust you'll do the right thing, as you always have." I took the box, my hands trembling, feeling as if I were holding the entire legacy of our ancestors. I opened it and found a different map, drawn on animal hide, its lines meticulously detailed. It wasn't just a map, it was a promise, a responsibility, the soul of Mother Earth. I looked at my parents, tears streaming down my face, not from sorrow, but from the realization that they had never abandoned me. "I'll keep it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll protect it, as you have, as our ancestors have." My mother came closer, hugging me tightly as she did when I was a child. My father placed his hand on my shoulder, his gaze steadfast, but filled with love. And now, in the old wooden cabin, amid the crackling fire and the warm voices of my parents, I suddenly understood. True value doesn't lie in money, in mansions, or in treasures. It lies in character, in how we protect our legacy, in how we live true to our beliefs. I gripped the real map tightly, knowing with certainty that I would never exploit it. I would preserve it as my parents had, as our ancestors had, so that Mother Earth would remain Mother Earth forever.